Hi there from Chicago. This is Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Thrilled to have you with us for the next hour. Mike Hall alongside Anthony Herron. Rivalry week.
I feel like you're just very proud of yourself for being able to adequately say rivalry week. There's a lot of folks who struggle with that phrase.
That's correct. I have nailed it this time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it again, though. We're going to go home with a win.
Rivalry week? Yeah.
What was your record?
You at home, try it. Believe me, it's not as easy as it sounds.
As a player, what was your record on the rivalry games?
Oh, man. See, the thing with Iowa, it feels like there are so many rivals within the Big Ten Conference. I mean, honestly, you got the in-state rival that's out of conference against the Cyclones.
Which is huge.
Yeah, there's not a lot of teams I root against more than the Iowa State Cyclones. But within the conference, I've gotten to hoist Floyd and carry him off the field. I've defeated the Wisconsin Badgers, although I'm trying to recall, it was certainly a heated rival. I don't recall if the trophy itself was there yet in place way back when I was actually playing.
And you weren't there for Nebraska because that wasn't.
And that's the thing. I played Nebraska twice while they were in the Big 12, but there wasn't a trophy on the line yet then either. But I'm old, I guess is what this comes down to.
If you had to guess, who would be Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports' main rival?
Ben Wetzel?
Ooh, is it Wetzel?
Wetzel's my coworker, but I guess in a way, one of your own can be your rival. So yes, it's Dan Wetzel hate week, I guess. For
all the Pat 40 in an octagon with Ross Dellinger.
All the D's and W in his house are X'd off, just like at Ohio State with M's. All right, let's get to our big story on today's show, and we are focusing on the Week 13 college football playoff rankings and how the teams did. Well, look at number 5, Indiana, lost. Look at number 7, lost. Number 9, lost. That means there will be shakeups with the selection committee, which will release their latest rankings coming up tonight. And I feel like the biggest question is Indiana. Yes, on the one hand, they lost by 23 points to their only very good team they have on their schedule. On the other hand, 2 weird special teams plays directly led to 14 points. Outside of that, Ross, it was a fairly close game. Even though I think it's safe to say Ohio State was the better team, it was still fairly close. You take those 2 rather freakish plays out of it, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is what the committee's going to think of Indiana. What are they going to think of them?
Yeah, that's right. I was there, covered the game, and it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like a blowout to me. And it was, you remove those 2 plays, and it's hard to remove any plays out of a game, but they cost Indiana, 14 points. So it wasn't necessarily this big blowout destruction that many people make it out to be. There are a lot of Indiana haters out there, right? that want, especially in maybe the southeastern footprint of the United States,
1 or 2 of them.
who point to Indiana's schedule, and we're just kind of waiting for anything close to a blowout or an inept performance to pounce on Indiana, and that's exactly what happened. But it didn't feel that bad. It really didn't. I don't know, how many points those 2 teams, Ohio State and Indiana, are separated by, but it's not 20-30, in my mind. It didn't feel like that. Think about it, guys. Ohio State had just over 300 yards of offense. Right. So Indiana's defense really stood tall with them. Indiana just couldn't move the ball enough. But that is the big question, Mike, going into the rankings, is where will Indiana fall? I've got them number 9 in my top 10. I think in the AP poll, they were number 10. I would guess they'll be right around 8 to 10. So I think they'll be squarely in the playoff in any kind of projected type of field. But you never know. You never know what the committee's going to do. But the biggest thing for Indiana on Saturday wasn't the loss on the field. It was the wins that happened by the Florida Gators and the Oklahoma Sooners to knock out Ole Miss and knock out Alabama from the projected playoff field, kind of paving a path not only for Indiana, but for Tennessee and potentially a Clemson or an ACC championship game runner-up.
And that was my sort of immediate thought as well, Ross, is by the end of the night Saturday, after all the additional carnage had taken place, and even Texas A&M, a 3-loss squad now too, to me, the top 4 in the Big Ten, I feel like are in really strong, solid position as it relates to the playoff structure. To me, it more so opens up the idea that perhaps there could be another multi-bid league as it relates to, whether it's the Big 12 or the ACC or something along those lines, because the Big Ten is in really strong position in the playoff. And specific to the Hoosiers, I mean, that performance against the Buckeyes, there are certain aspects of a game where Ohio State's moving the ball, they get stopped on a 4th down. Yes, it was a quality sequence up to a certain point. But then C.J. West dominates the line of scrimmage and stuffs them on a 4th down. So that's Indiana making a play. The punt return by Caleb Downs for the Buckeyes. Yeah, you don't necessarily see punt return touchdowns on a regular basis, but that to me is a moment in the game that Ohio State deserves like full credit for. They're making a play on special teams. But a wet football just going through the hands of the player, that's a self-inflicted wound. That's a mistake by the Hoosiers that then Ohio State capitalizes on late in the first half to put points on the board that does end up shifting the momentum, turn the tide in the game. But just the snap-by-snap grade of the film from the game was not this overwhelming dominance for the Buckeyes. And then, of course, the late touchdown where are you really even still playing football the last couple of snaps of the game? You get the QB sneak from Will Howard, you add the additional touchdown to it. So overall, it was a game where Ohio State was definitively the better team on the field, but it's the number 2 team in the country on the road at the Horseshoe, 100,000, kind of coming at you. It was the first game I think we saw a degree of frailty from the Hoosiers in reacting to the surrounding environment, because frankly, they haven't had to be in a hostile environment like that frequently this season. But again, comparing the two teams play in and play out, Indiana was there and able to do battle with the Buckeyes at a reasonable level.
Yeah, I think my takeaway was they belong in the playoff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they're a national title contender. There's really only a couple teams that are, and I think that's solidified for me. They're not a national title contender. But they are a playoff team, and I would love to see them in a 10-7, 8-9 type matchup. I think they've got a really good shot against a team like that in the playoff. But we mentioned Ohio State. They were the team that won this game. It is their second win over a top 5 team this year. Ross, they're not going to be number 1 because they lost to the number 1 team, which is undefeated in Oregon. But it almost feels like it's not a question of where they go, but almost the separation between those two teams and everybody else.
Absolutely, yeah. Oregon and Ohio State feel like they have very much separated themselves from the pack, and probably at least according to my rankings, I think Georgia is probably the next best team at number 3. Now the committee will probably, and I think the AP poll as well, put Texas there, but there's a big gap. I think there's a pretty large gap between the top 2 and then number 3 right now, and that's a testament to how Oregon and Ohio State have played in their schedules. In Ohio State, in Oregon both, but especially Ohio State is one of the, when you look at the metrics, one of the toughest strength of schedules, right, of anybody in the country. So it's not only what they've done and how they've done it, how they've won these games, but they also have a pretty dang top 20, I think, ranked strength of schedule does Ohio State, and a couple of ranked wins. So I think their resume is right up there with the best, and that's the gap, right, that we're seeing. So if all goes as planned, right, which Oregon, Ohio State meeting again in the Big Ten championship game, the loser of that game, right, will be the 5 seed in the playoff, because only conference champions can get one of the top 4 seeds in the bye. But they will almost certainly set themselves up for the loser of the Big Ten championship game to get the highest seed that a non-champion can receive, which is the 5 seed hosting the 12 seed in an on-campus game. And so you look at the right now the 4 the Big Ten teams right now that are going to probably make the playoff. And you've got one of them's going to receive a bye, the champion. One of them's going to get the highest seed for a non-champion and host a game. A third one in Penn State should get a high enough seed to host a game. And then Indiana probably, you would think, is going to have to play on the road. But an incredible lineup there, right? No other conference is going to have that lineup where they have a team with a bye, 2 teams hosting a game, and then a 4th team in the playoff field.
It is intriguing, Ross, when you think about how much just that matchup, even with Indiana coming out on the short end, but how amazing a squad Ohio State is this season, ends up boosting the strength of schedule for the Hoosiers into like right around 50. Right. So, I mean, their strength of schedule now is beyond Miami. It's beyond SMU, but it's because they went toe-to-toe on the road against the number 2 team in the country. But the Buckeyes right now, I believe, are still sort of the odds-on favorite to win the national championship. That's an expectation a lot of folks still have for the Buckeyes at this point because they're just an incredible squad. And since that defeat in Eugene at Oregon, they've begun to play better and better football. And it wasn't, just this matchup where they wiped the floor with Indiana in that game. But we saw plays get made by the running backs, especially Travion Henderson, able to do some nice things in what ended up being limited touches in the game. I felt like it was the best game of the season for Will Howard, and he's played a lot of quality football. 17 games in a row that Will Howard's had a touchdown pass, 7 different games so far this season where he's had a rushing touchdown to go with that as well. But the precision that he threw the football with, we're not just talking about, bubble screens or open slant routes or, fades where you're throwing it up to some playmaker who's going to go up over people's heads. I mean, there were some balls where he thread the needle into tight windows, able to turn the trajectory like the nose of the football over the second level, getting it in front of the third level on some outcuts. Was really impressed with the way he threw it, 22 out of 26 in that game against a really quality Indiana defense. They weren't making things easy for the Buckeyes, but Will Howard has continued to step his game up more and more throughout this season, and I feel like it's not just the tangible with him, but the intangible that the team feeds off of the way he seems to now be able to rise up in some critical moments. And I really love the style of play for him. And Jim Knowles, been talking about him in that Buckeyes defense this season schematically. They do some different, some unique, some versatile, cool things where at first, pass rush wasn't getting home. The pocket was clean. Right. Then you started to dial up that pressure and you saw the impact it had.
We did have a plan to talk about Oregon, but they were off this week and we're running a little low. So I want to move to Penn State on that one. The Nittany Lions get a 1-point win, and we were talking on this show last week about how sneaky Minnesota could be for the Nittany Lions. But at the end of the day, Ross, they're still alive. They still have only one loss, and a win's a win.
You're right. And I look back at that game, which was really back and forth kind of battle there. And you look at James Franklin's decision late in the game with a minute and a half or 2 minutes left to that fake punt, right? To fake the punt, and if that doesn't go as planned, right? As James Franklin himself said, I think on Monday during his news conference, we wouldn't be talking about roast turkey. We'd be talking about roasting James Franklin. That fake punt doesn't go as planned, but it did. It was huge. For the Nittany Lions and obviously keeps them, like I said earlier, squarely in probably the top 5 or 6 of the CFP committee's rankings, which means a home playoff game in Happy Valley. They're bracing for that there. They're expecting that to host a game. How exciting, would that be? We get to see more of Tyler Warren, which continues to have incredible games. Had another, I think, 8-catch, 100-yard game against Minnesota.
And part of the way that the Gophers were able to test Penn State, Ross, I mean, they made it a point. They said, we're going to run the football at Abdul Carter. He's a guy still learning the defensive end position, how you have to set a physical edge at the point of attack. And he's still finding the nuance of how to do that on a consistent basis. But that wasn't enough. It's still a spectacular Penn State defense. And in the critical moments, James Franklin making that decision, it reminded me very much of a few weeks ago we saw Dan Lanning run a fake punt to his big man, Jordan Birch, defensive lineman, backed up. That was in the third quarter of a game. There was still a lot of football to play, and Oregon had the lead. We're talking the final 4 minutes of a ball game, backed up at your own 35. If you don't convert that for Penn State, you're gift wrapping points for the Minnesota Gophers, where they can take a lead late. But I do believe, from James Franklin's perspective, he's still able to take that big picture, the full scope of things into account and say, well, okay, yeah, there's almost 4 minutes left. If we do give up the lead here, we're likely to get the football back. But if it goes well, the risk-reward analysis, the reward is we can end the game on our terms. And I love the aggression of that play call, factoring in everything that it did and allowing a freshman in Luke Reynolds to make that play, trusting his special teams to get the job done, and then his offense on 4th downs, closing the show. Drew Aller, not just the physical abilities that he brings to it, but we're seeing playmaking in some of those crunch time moments now as he's developed throughout his career. It's been a really special thing to watch his development. So I'm just taken by the intangibles, the grit of Penn State this season. I feel like it's enhanced a bit over what we've seen in recent years that, personnel-wise at the skill position, maybe they're not on par with Oregon and Ohio State. But Ross mentioned Tyler Warren. You know, I've been banging that Tyler Warren drum all season, man. If he was a wide receiver, I don't think most folks would have many complaints about the idea of Penn State not necessarily having explosive abilities like everyone else. But because he's a tight end and so that label is different, then it feels like it gets diminished in people's eyes.
Nobody's on par with Tyler Warren this year.
Agreed.
What he's been doing is marvelous. And all they got to do is beat Maryland this weekend, and they're a lock for the first ever 12-team college football playoff. Oh, this is my favorite big board of all the big boards we've had all year. Come on.
What's so special about it?
Name one matchup you're not interested in.
I can't.
I mean, maybe UCLA Fresno State doesn't drive you. I get that.
I love
But look
that
at
one, too.
everything else.
Yes, it is a darling big board. I agree.
Illinois Northwestern at Wrigley, the game at the Shoe, Notre Dame, USC, the old Oaken Bucket, Oregon, Washington.
I mean, it is rivalry week.
It is rivalry week. Let's break down some of these games. And we'll start off with the game, Michigan and Ohio State. Ross, 3 straight wins for Michigan. And I'll say this, all 3 of those, the week of, most people were saying, well, Ohio State's the better team. They've clearly got more talent. And then Michigan ended up winning. It's a different situation this year, but that is the same sentence most people are saying.
Yeah, I think I saw a stat, guys, that Michigan is I think they're maybe right around a 20-point underdog right now, 19, 20 points. It's the biggest underdog they've been in a game against Ohio State, maybe ever. In the last 2 times, they were at least a 17-point underdog in general, was against Ohio State. It happened twice, one time in the 60s, one time in the 90s. They won both games as a 17-plus point underdog. So all the pressure on this one feels like it's on Ryan Day and the Buckeyes. And Ryan Day, there was a clip of Ryan Day, it was either over the weekend or on Monday, that kind of went viral on social media of Ryan Day saying how impactful negatively that the 3 straight losses to Michigan has been on him and his family. And it really kind of took a dark turn, the interview, because you could just see on his face and some of the things he said, even comparing losing a football game multiple times in a row to your rival to a funeral for his father. I mean, so it is deep, this rivalry. It impacted him and his family significantly, losing 3 times in a row. So this is one where all the pressure feels like it is on the Buckeyes. It is on Ryan Day to try to break this skid, and not just that, but continue this path right to the playoff. Because if things break right in Michigan somehow pulls this upset, right? Ohio State is not just potentially out of the Big Ten championship game, guys, but they could be out of the playoff race or certainly on the bubble. So this is a huge one. And that pressure, man, it's big right now in the Buckeyes. And it's felt like that all season. We've talked about each game, right, felt like a pressure game. But this one is the big one.
It has been a gauntlet of a schedule for Ohio State this season. There's no doubt about that. I mean, even the surprise that Indiana has been. So you're coming off of this top 5 matchup against the Hoosiers, and now a chance to close the regular season against the rival. And that was what Ryan Day immediately spoke about, even in the postgame. He couldn't wait to stop talking about defeating the Hoosiers and start talking about preparing for the rivalry game to close out the regular season. And my brain can't help to go to Tumunga Biaka-Batuka, because that's the player who, when we think of matchups similar to this, you've got a good but not great Michigan squad and an elite level Buckeyes program, and Biaka-Batuka just went off in one of those contests and was able to upset the Buckeyes. And John Cooper, in an amazing career he had as Ohio State coach, that's the thing that's on his resume. It's like, all right, you had some of those key losses to Michigan, and in what would have been, if the system now were in place back then, John Cooper would have been making the college football playoff on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So that's where my brain goes, is any concern for the Buckeye. This is a good Michigan team. They've got a good ground attack. Kal-El Mullings could potentially go off this week, and certainly from an Ohio State State perspective, you're worried about that defensive front from the Wolverines because they got guys who can penetrate, get after the quarterback. And we've been talking about the machinations up front on that offensive line for the Buckeyes. It is a matchup that I'm sure has the full attention of both Ryan Day and Chip Kelly.
OSU this close to a Big Ten title game rematch against Oregon. Speaking of the Ducks, they have Washington for the 117th time. And Ross, I know the rosters are drastically different, but still, the Huskies have won 3 in a row in this rivalry.
Well, yeah, this is one that's kind of a bit similar to Ohio State, Michigan. When you look right at Michigan and look at Washington, right? 2 programs that vastly different places than they were, right? Just 7, 8, 9 months ago, playing for a national title, and then boom, there's this drop off, right? And their rivals have managed to stay on top and build their rosters, and arguably, obviously, Oregon, Ohio State, 2 of the best in the country. So a lot of similarities in a lot of ways here. I'm not sure this one will be close, and it's part of what you just said, Mike. It's been 3 straight as well in this one for Oregon, and the way Oregon has been playing, and the fact they're in Eugene at home. This just feels like the game's set up for the Ducks to kind of exploit the Huskies here and try to keep alive, right, that #1 seed in the playoff and that Rose Bowl trip in the quarterfinals. So that's certainly motivation enough for Oregon to get this done. But it is crazy, Anthony, how similar these 2 rivalry games are when you look at the matchup, the location, the stakes, and all that.
And when we think about it, Dan Lanning, because he's been so impressive as a head coach, I almost feel like the discussion about him gets fast-forwarded a little bit, where folks forget this is year 3 for him with the big whistle. So there's still a lot that he has yet to accomplish in leading the Oregon program, in as much as he's already accomplished through 2+ seasons at this point. So to defeat Washington will be a big deal when he takes down the Dogs, if at whatever point that's able to happen. Making and winning a conference championship game, that's going to be a huge threshold for Dan Lanning at whatever point he's able to make that happen. But there are things on the resume that he's still looking to mount and make sure he can have that happen. And so a game like this, where there's playmakers on the opposing sideline, and he's been such a great motivator for that program through his defensive lens, talent like multiple quarterbacks who can make plays, a running back like Jonah Coleman, the talent outside of wide receiver. Now, Washington hasn't been the same squad on the road, but there is a lot that Oregon's had to get ready for over their bye.
Yeah, 0-5 away from home, Washington this season. I want to get to Nebraska, Iowa, because I think the whole season for Nebraska can change. That win last week gets them bowl eligible. But now think, Ross, of what we could be looking at. If they win this game, then they get a rivalry win. They could have an 8-win season if they win a bowl game. Now you're going, hang on, we beat our rival and we won a bowl game, not only getting into it. That is a very good second year for Matt Rule.
It is, and maybe a lot of us thought that Nebraska would get to that 8, 9, maybe even 10-win mark and compete potentially for a championship. I think a lot of ways they were the dark horse of the season. They didn't get there, but getting to 7 wins, especially with Dylan Raiola, a true freshman quarterback, is a remarkable, I think, accomplishment, especially in this league. But last week you mentioned it, right? They did the thing. They finally snapped a 7-year bowl skid, and they had lost 9 straight with a bowl game on the line. Just going back over that 7-year stretch. So that was huge. Talked to some folks up there in Lincoln after the game, and it was like celebrating. One of them said it was like celebrating a national championship. That's how it felt up there. So tons of excitement and stuff. And it kind of reminds us all, Anthony, of, these games might be irrelevant to the playoff picture. They are not irrelevant to a fan base in a program, especially one like Nebraska is trying to take a significant step forward under a fairly new coach. So that was pretty fun to see them get back to a bowl. And now, yeah, like Mike said, they can take the next step and get to that 7-win mark. And all of this launching into the offseason has a big effect on next season as well.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at these games maybe living on rivalry way, there's not many that have been played more often than USC and Notre Dame. And so Iowa, Nebraska, the Hawks and the Huskers, that'll certainly be one that could be a lot of fun. But I think that for USC, the opportunity that's in front of them, like coming into the season, it wasn't like everyone was talking about the Trojans being in the national championship picture. But now we're at the point in the season where they defeated LSU in the opener, and so the discussion around the Trojans and their capabilities, their potential for the year drastically adjusted after that victory, and they've had so many losses that were this close, where they got the lead in the fourth quarter, not quite able to pull it off. Now, a couple of wins in a row here, and it's maybe the opportunity to knock Notre Dame out of the college football playoff picture. There's been so much carnage. Who knows for sure how the committee would view that, but if you're looking for additional motivating factors for the Trojans, that's certainly one. We know the bowl picture will now be there for USC as well. And if they get to a 7th win and then perhaps an 8th win in postseason play, that's honestly around where the expectations could have been, should have been, and pretty much were for USC coming into this season. So all those close losses, I think, have adjusted how we view the season for USC. But if they could become an 8-win squad this season by the end of it, and all the playmakers that have been there for Lincoln Riley, that really is an accomplishment for where we thought they would be coming into the season.
Yeah, it's a delicious carrot at the end of the stick there.
Right.
You could not only beat a rival a week after beating a rival, but knock them out of the playoff potentially, get that 8th win. I agree that you could have a lot of momentum if they end this season on a winning streak and make into a bowl game and win that one as well. But again, tall task. Notre Dame is ranked in the top 10 for a reason. They've been very good since that loss to Northern Illinois. All right, a lot more to get to. We're going to turn our attention away from football for a second. The Buckeye women's team ranked number 2, brought in the number 2 ranked prospect in the country. She's playing great. So is the whole team. 5-0 start. Head coach Kevin McGuff next. Turn to women's hoops now. Game leaders presented by Gatorade. It's Ohio State's excellent start to the season. They are 5-0 on the year. They are putting the ball in the basket, more than 93 points a game. Great shooting from deep as well. It is a nice start to the season for Kevin McGuff, the reigning Big Ten Coach of the Year, who's good enough to join us now from Columbus. And Kevin, give me an idea of something you've learned about your team at this point early on in the season that might have surprised you a little bit.
Well, I really like the talent level of our team. It's been an interesting start to the season, though, because we've had the benefit these last couple of years of being an older, more mature team with a lot of experience. We had J.C. Sheldon for 5 years. We had Rebecca for 5 years. Celeste Taylor was in her 5th year in college, and Ricky Harris was here for 5 years. But now we've got 7 newcomers that we're trying to acclimate into the program. And so I really like our talent level, but we've been a little bit up and down. And I think if we'll just continue to get better throughout the year, we could have a great season.
Well, one of those youngsters, of course, Jelani Cambridge, who was shot out of a cannon with 31 points in 26 minutes in her debut, and 6 assists and 6 rebounds. What have you seen from her so far this year?
She's a really special player. She's a great kid. She's been extremely coachable, works extremely hard. And when people get a chance to see her play, you'll see one of the fastest players you've ever seen on the court, where the ball actually comes with her when she's flying up and down the court.
Yeah, Taylor Theory told me at Media Days this year, the way she phrased it, you'll love this, she's up there with JC. Is that fair?
She's got speed and quickness like JC, and JC was really special and obviously a great player for us. And Jelani's got a long way to go to kind of catch where the impact that JC had in our program, but she's really special. She's extremely coachable, and our players love playing with her because not only can she generate shots for herself, but she makes everybody around her better.
Yeah. Well, that was, of course, something JC was so good at, and we might as well follow up because now she's on your staff, man. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue she was the face of your program since you've been here. That's how important she's been.
Yeah, and one of my concerns heading into this year was just her presence in our program and our leadership. She was such a great leader, and with all these newcomers, it's just great to have her around. She's just awesome with our players, and I think she's going to have a great impact this year.
Another one of the newcomers that you were referencing is Chance Gray, who already has 20 three-pointers made this year, which is wild. That's more than a Big Ten team has at this point in the season. But then it's not wild because you're like, oh, yeah, she had 9 in a game. But then you're like, wait, that's crazy, too. How do you describe her shooting from deep?
Yeah, she's a great player. She's from Ohio, and she kind of slipped away from us during her high school recruiting and went to Oregon. But we were really happy to bring her back. And if you looked at our season last year, if we lost games, one of the reasons why we lost some games last year is we didn't shoot the ball well from the perimeter. So we really wanted to shore that up, and we were very specific when we went into the portal to get a chance to try to help us shoot the ball better.
For a while, when you guys would win a game, you'd give the Player of the Game honor, the Dub chain. But the chain is gone, and now it's the Dub crown. What happened?
We just kind of had to reinvent ourselves, and my staff does a great job with that. My assistant Jalen came up with the Dub chain originally, and then she kind of had a new idea, and I think it's awesome. Our kids have kind of taken to it, but just kind of wanted to refresh it and give it a new look.
Well, where's the chain now?
That's a closely guarded secret, Mike, that I can't share with you at this particular moment in time.
Okay, I was just gonna say, if it needs a home, I've got room. If it's
no, we may break it out at a certain time this year. Who knows?
All right. You are 5-0 on the season, and we've mentioned multiple players, but still haven't mentioned Cody McMahon. Unfortunately, she got injured. She missed a couple games. Give us the latest on her health.
Yeah, she's day to day. I mean, she's close to being back on the floor with us, and just want to make sure that we take our time and put her in the best position possible when she does come back.
There's been so much emphasis on some super highly recruited incomers, whether they're freshmen this year or people who were highly recruited when they went out of high school that are now in your program. But let me ask you about someone who was not necessarily regarded like that. Elsa Lamilla has been very productive for you guys the first handful of games. What have you seen from her?
She's got a chance to be a star here. She's a great athlete at 6'5". She can really run and jump, and she's also got a great skill set to go along with it. And she had an injury her senior year of high school. She tore her ACL, so she's really only been back on the court for about 5 or 6 weeks, and she's just getting better each week, each day. And so I think that if she can continue to improve throughout the season, she will be very impactful for us.
Every time I talk with you about your players, I feel like you've got this control. Like, it feels like very rarely does something surprise you. You'll be like, oh, yeah, well, we saw that when she was a high school sophomore. Or, yeah, we were watching her film back in the day. When was the last time a player genuinely surprised you?
Well, it happens. I mean, they surprise me all the time, but we're very specific and intentional who we bring into the program when we usually feel like we have a good feel. But I think I could go all the way back to, let's say, Taylor Theory, because when we recruited Taylor, we knew she was a great kid, but it was during that COVID time. So we probably didn't get a chance to see her as much as we normally see people. And when she got here, we very early on knew she was going to be a great player for us, and we were pleasantly surprised in some areas.
Last night I was calling the Illinois men's game, and I was sitting with Brad Underwood and Bruce Weber, and they were talking about the Big Ten. And Bruce was saying, this is that fun time of year when you're rooting so hard for the Big Ten, because the way that everybody else does, if they succeed, it helps you when you have to play them in the season. How much do you find yourself watching and following along with what the rest of the Big Ten is doing in November?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think in the Big Ten, we're off to a great start as a conference. UCLA just had a huge win versus a great South Carolina team. And we've had other significant wins throughout the conference. And, I thought we had the best conference last year for sure. And there's no doubt about it this year.
I don't want to bring this down, but what are your Bengals doing, man?
Oh my gosh. It's like, it feels like every week is a must win and we're not getting the wins. And so we've got another must win against Pittsburgh this coming Sunday. So hopefully we can get it together, because if we can't win this one, we're about running out of time.
Yeah, luckily they're only a first place team, so I'm sure it should be easy for you.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
You're spending the holiday in Daytona Beach. You got room for one more?
Yeah, come on, let's go.
Sorry, bosses, I'm off to Florida. I think they're fine with it. Kevin McGuff, always great, man. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Pretty impressive stuff for the Fighting Illini to get the win in such dramatic fashion. And I think it's right at the end to talk about Pat Bryant. He was marvelous. I mean, he made that happen. That was maybe a first down, and then he found the angles to get there. And Ross, this is kind of a thing that Illinois has done all season long. This is now the 4th time they've been victorious in a one-score game this year.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and we kind of forget about Illinois' playoff chances. They're there now. They might be pretty small, right? Probably under 10%, 5%, but they exist. In fact, I had posted a graphic on social media recently that kind of outlined the top 20 in the AP poll in each team's resume, basically playoff resume. Well, Illinois is ranked number 25, so I didn't have them included. some of the Illinois people made sure to let me know about that and told me about their resume. And it is really impressive when you look at it, right? They don't have but one bad loss to Minnesota, you might say, one unranked loss. But they have a pretty decent schedule. Their schedule rank, I think, is in the top 30 nationally. And when you look at that, two of their 3 wins came against playoff teams, right? Penn State in Oregon. So they actually have a pretty solid playoff resume. They need a lot of crazy things to happen, right? They probably need like 4, 5, 6 upsets to happen to get on that playoff bubble. But it was, I think, overall, this season for Illinois is definitely a success, and they got a chance here, Anthony, to do something that I don't know the last time they did it. I can't remember if they actually did it a couple years ago under Bielema, but is win a 6th conference game, and that at Illinois for Illinois football is a big deal.
And when you factor in, Ross, the expectations coming into the season, this is far beyond what many of us thought the Illini would be capable of this year. And I feel like that's a part of where kind of the larger picture of college football is having some difficulty wrapping their mind around how good the Illini have been this season. They haven't been the most overwhelming opponent from a game control perspective. But to win close games in critical moments, that matters. That speaks to coaching. That speaks to the determination and focus of your football team, leadership like Luke Altmaier and Pat Bryant, who can make critical decisions at the snap of a finger and recognize this is an opportunity to go beyond what we have designed for this particular moment, as we saw Pat Bryant do in that moment, as we saw Brett Bielema do in adjusting on the fly. And then by comparison, to a lot of these other 3-loss teams that you see folks trying to make cases for why they should still be included in the playoff picture, no other power conference 3-loss team has faced a more difficult strength of schedule this season than the Illini. And you look at 2 of the 3 teams they lost to, the number 1 team in the country, the number 4 team in the country, each who will no doubt make the college football playoff if the results go as are expected this weekend. And then a bowl-eligible Minnesota squad, a game that the Illini had an opportunity to win but didn't. But that's a 6-5 Minnesota team. That's better than the worst loss of most of those other 3-loss teams that have lost to multiple unranked squads this season. So the resume for the Illini, right now, because the Big Ten is so deep, it doesn't feel like they're going to easily be boosted into the playoff conversation. But by comparison to a lot of the other teams in their resumes, Illinois doesn't have to take a backseat to any of the other 3-loss teams in the conversation.
I was talking last night with the Illinois athletic director, Josh Whitman, and barring chaos, which is, of course, possible any rivalry week, but barring chaos, if Illinois wins at Wrigley Field against Northwestern, if Indiana avoids the upset against Purdue, you're looking at the Citrus Bowl for the Illini. And that would be an incredible bowl game for this program. First really big bowl like that since 2007 when they were in the Rose Bowl, basically. All right, listen, how would you ever possibly rank the rivalries in the Big Ten? You couldn't do it. Why would you do it? You'd be foolish to try. Antha does it next. One of the great rivalries. And if you look at notable rivalries this weekend, some of them are fairly close. Wisconsin, only 1 more win than Minnesota all time. Illinois, only 2 wins more than Northwestern. These go back forever ago. And Anthony, with that to start off, the Impact 5 best rivalries in the Big Ten. The stage is yours.
And the good thing is, when I do these rankings and they go out on social media, no one ever takes issue with it. No one ever sends me any diatribe out there on Twitter or Instagram. So that's fun. I'm glad everyone's going to enjoy this. I'm going to start at number 5. And there will be one team who will appear multiple times in my Impact 5 here, but the Michigan State rivalry, that's one where, because it is an in-state clash, there's such vitriol that goes back and forth between these 2 programs. And, yes, this rivalry has gone more the way of the maize and blue than it has the green and white, but it's not for lack of trying by Michigan State. And there's been a stretch here of recent vintage where Michigan State has had the upper hand frequently enough where this does feel like a clash. This does feel like a legit rivalry. And I think there's very few matchups in the conference that do have as much steam behind them, as much angst for whoever the winner and loser of this game is. So that one being at number 5, I think you can make a case it could be even higher.
Not even on rivalry week, and yet it's
yeah,
still.
Right.
At number 4, you've got one of the new rivalries to the league.
Yes, man. You get out toward that left coast, you get into the Pacific Northwest, and we've seen, especially in recent years here, what Oregon and Washington, the border war, when they do battle, what that's meant to the scope of each of these magnificent programs, because both of them are accustomed to being in the championship conversation, and each eagerly look forward to the chance to knock the other off. When I had a chance to talk to Jed Fish earlier in the season, it's one thing he mentioned. He didn't recognize the passion that fans had, that fans of the Dogs had for the opportunity to take down the Ducks as they did multiple times last season. So yes, and this one has been played more often than many of the rivalries within the Big Ten Conference that have been there historically. So when you got the Ducks and the Dogs doing battle, it's one that folks look forward to.
Quickly at 3, you do have the old Oaken bucket there.
I do, and I've gotten to call this game on the Big Ten Network. It's a fun one, no doubt. And yes, again, one that's within the state of Indiana. So both fan bases look for the bragging rights. Usually there's one program that's having a much more successful season than the other. That is the case this year. So looking forward to watching this one play out.
Very old rivalry at number 2.
And to be able to see what's happening between Wisconsin and Minnesota for Paul Bunyan's axe, we all look forward to that moment at the end of the game when they're going to chop down the goalposts and do so. And now to be able to have that opportunity this week with the Badgers trying to make a bowl.
And number 1's no shocker.
No surprise. The game, I mean, do you need a trophy on the line for this one? No, you don't need a trophy when Ohio State and Michigan are doing battle. Big opportunity for the Wolverines to see if they can knock off the Bucks.
Ross, anything outside of the Big Ten you're keeping your eye on in particular this rivalry weekend?
Well, this weekend there are some rivals, in-state rivals, that can basically eliminate their in-state rival from playoff contention. You know, you look at what's going on down at Texas A&M. Obviously, haven't played in 11 years. Their revival of a rivalry this weekend. 2 top 20 teams, right, with playoff stakes on the line. Tennessee at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has an opportunity to get a 7th win, but also to knock Tennessee, an at-large team in the playoff right now, probably out of the postseason. And then finally, Clemson, South Carolina. Huge playoff ramifications there. The winner is potentially in, the loser out.
I do love your first one there. The fact that Texas and Texas A&M is back. It was just one of those things that had to happen every year. I'm glad, as a college football fan, that's back.
I'm going to have fun calling the Bayou Classic this
That's
Saturday.
right.
That's a great one with Grambling and Southern.
All right, thanks for watching.
Rivalry week. Rivalry week.